Welcome to the Heidi Thorne Show. I'm your host, Heidi Thorne, and in this podcast, I share my real-world self-publishing and small business experience with you. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends on social media. Now let's get started with today's show. On YouTube, I ran across a self-published author who claimed that he had made $87,000 in royalties from Kindle Direct Publishing. Wow, that is amazing. He also shared that he had spent $39,000 on Amazon ads to get that result. Again, wow. Still, after paying for the ads and all the other related marketing costs, he ended up with $49,000 gross profit margin. I wasn't sure if that included a deduction for overhead and taxes and everything, but still $49,000 isn't too shabby. That's an amazing result. But this was his first year in self-publishing. First of all, that's like lightning in a bottle type of results. You're not going to get those on a regular basis. And from what I could see of his material, it was very timely. So it's hard to tell if this will continue into the future. I'm hoping that he'll share some updates because those are some pretty amazing results. Then another popular self-published author was featured in a Forbes article in 2015. Now that's been some years ago already. And he had royalty incomes that were reported at $450,000 from Amazon. Oh my. But later in the article, he shared that he spends up to $370 per day on Facebook ads. Even if it wasn't every day, that's still a lot of money. If it was every day, we are looking at a six-figure ad spend of about $135,000. Now that was 2015, and the author reported that he doubles his ad spend in terms of ROI. It's hard to say whether those results would be achieved today because Facebook, Instagram, and all social media advertising has become much more competitive. So it's hard to say. Now, I'm guessing that some of you out there might be just a little bit jealous, and I'm going to tell you not to be. These are examples of what I call authorpreneurs. And they're not like most self-published authors. So let's figure out what is the difference between an author and an authorpreneur. Authors self-publish in the hopes of just making some sales. In my Thorne self-publishing survey of 2016 and 2018, I found in both years that 73% of self-published authors make less than $1,000 a year in book income, whether that's royalties or actual sales. Most self-published authors are motivated by their love of writing. They want to express themselves creatively, fulfill a lifelong dream, and those were the top 3 motivations in the 2018 survey. Making money from their book was their 4th motivation. Authorpreneurs, in contrast, are really entrepreneurs. Thus the term authorpreneur, author plus entrepreneur. And they just happen to be authors or publishers. Some authorpreneurs, this is funny, don't even really care whether they're the author or not. They just want to make money, and this seems like a good way to do it. The YouTube self-publisher that was successful that I talked about earlier, he did some book development from what I gathered, but mostly he hired ghostwriters. So he's really not a self-published author. He's really more of an indie or independent publisher. I think he was referring to himself as a self-published author because he's running the operation and he just outsources some of these activities like ghostwriting. And authorpreneurs may not even care about publishing either. Today, it's self-publishing that works for them. Tomorrow, it might be reselling items on eBay or fulfillment by Amazon or buying into a fast food franchise. They're just as willing to walk away from publishing if success doesn't materialize or it doesn't continue over time. Now, as evidenced by their investment in advertising, they're willing to spend a great deal of money with absolutely no guarantee of success. And while that seems kind of foolish, it really isn't if they do their research in advance of purchasing ads. And I would imagine that if they're spending that kind of money, they're probably doing a lot of research before they ever sign on to run those ads. Here's something very, very important. Being an authorpreneur is not better than being an author or vice versa. You just need to understand and be committed to the path that you're on. So what are some of the additional differences between authors and authorpreneurs? Authors invest in book production. Authorpreneurs invest in advertising. I know I'm going to hear a lot of you crying. I spent a lot of money on my self-published book. Doesn't that make me an authorpreneur? No, it doesn't. You may have spent a ton of money on your self-published book, but it was all for book production, editing, formatting, proofreading, book cover design. Those are all book production costs, and your interest in making sales is really just to recoup those costs. And if you could make a little money beyond that, that would be great. In contrast, authorpreneurs often talk about easier, faster, cheaper ways to produce books without sacrificing quality. But their greatest investment is in advertising and marketing. They're not just trying to recoup costs, they're trying to make money. Authors build fans. Authorpreneurs build sales. Because most authors don't have a lot of money to spend on these astronomical advertising costs, they go with the marketing they can afford, and that is building a following on social media, your author platform, your fan base. It doesn't scale easily or quickly, and that's why authorpreneurs, you'll find, don't really get into the whole social media game to the degree that most authors do. So I dug a little deeper with those two example authors that I talked about in the opening, and the YouTube self-publisher didn't really have a whole lot of other links to social media except for maybe Instagram. On his Instagram account, it was just beautiful pictures of his lifestyle or maybe lifestyle aspirations. And the website he lists on all of his materials is one to his self-publishing success program. So he's all about selling. And there's nothing wrong with that. Really nothing wrong with that. But he is an entrepreneur. He is about sales through and through. And he is a true authorpreneur. The second author I talked about is a real author, as well as an authorpreneur. He posts pretty frequently on some of the social channels, but it's not a highly engaged, you're not seeing a lot of conversation going on. And in all honesty, I can't see how he has the time to do it because he's both an author and an authorpreneur. So I wouldn't expect him to be super active on the social channels. So let's circle back to some advertising issues. Another authorpreneur I found on YouTube was talking about how he made 10 grand per month selling audiobooks on Audible. Of course, because I have several books on Audible, I want to know what this guy's story is. So I listened to his pitch, And he clearly stated that if you don't have any money, you have student loans, you have debt, or you have other financial responsibilities, his program is not for you because, surprise, surprise, you're going to have to spend on advertising. Are you seeing a theme developing here? You should. And this is nothing new. It takes ad money to build sales money. And you'll have to pay money upfront and continuously for advertising and customer acquisition costs if you want to be an authorpreneur. I spent most of my career in advertising and publishing. So I would say that both authors and authorpreneurs should consider advertising because it does work, but you have to align it with your goals and your budget limitations. Now, here's a big question. If you did dump a whole bunch of money into advertising, would you be able to wait for the returns or the royalties? When you publish on Kindle Direct Publishing, you get royalties approximately 60 days after the sale is made. However, your Amazon marketing services, Amazon ads, and your Facebook ads or wherever else you're advertising, those costs are going to have to be paid right away. Those advertising sites don't care if you're having a bad month. They ran your ad, you're going to pay them. And here's the other thing about this lag between the sale being made and when you get paid is that there's high volatility. So the YouTube self-publisher I talked about, he shared in another video that he had royalty income of about $25,000 in 1 month, and the next month it was 11 grand. That is a swing of over 50% from 1 month to the next. That is high volatility. And you might see some authorpreneurs or those that are not experienced in the ways of business and advertising, they might want to go for broke. And so they end up becoming advertising gamblers. And they just think that, oh, the next month it's going to be better. The next month it's going to be better. And after a few months, they realize that they're in a hole of either debt or lost money. And now what? So if you do decide to go on this authorpreneur path, you're also going to have to keep tabs on all of those costs and your royalty or other revenues extremely closely. You're going to have to do that at least weekly, and I would presume that even in the middle of the week you might want to be checking. You have to be pretty savvy to go down this authorpreneur path. And here's why authorpreneurs who don't build a fan base on social media can't stop advertising on Amazon. They need to advertise all the time because it's impossible to create a mailing list of customers from Amazon sales. Amazon doesn't share with you, oh, here, this person, and here's their contact information, they bought your book. They don't share that information with you. So they just have to keep advertising and advertising to keep getting new people to buy their stuff all the time. So that's why their ad costs are very, very high. So on the opposite side of the advertising spending spectrum are self-published authors who want to spend $5 a day on their ad on Facebook or their pennies per click ads. Hey, I understand that. I've done them both. And it's not going to do much. I have found that from my personal experiments with advertising on both platforms that you don't get much bang for those little bucks. And here's the reason why. When you have a higher ad spend, which I've done for some of my survey research work, you get more visibility and frequency with that bigger ad spend. So if you're just spending a little bit of money, they're not going to show your ad very often. So you don't get that much return from little ad spends. I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it, but you might want to spend more time on social media instead if you are really strapped for cash. So let's do a little quiz to see if you're an author or an authorpreneur. You might be an author if you want to write and publish what you want to write, regardless of what the market wants. You just want to self-publish the books that you've written yourself, and you have no funds or guts for spending thousands of dollars on advertising on top of your book production costs. You might be an authorpreneur if you don't care if you write the book. In fact, if you can find some ghostwriters to write it better, cheaper, faster than you can, you'd be thrilled. You have access to thousands of dollars to spend on advertising, and you're willing to spend it without a guarantee of any return. You're financially and emotionally able to weather the entrepreneurial roller coaster of feast and famine months. You love the sales and marketing game, including SEO and keyword research. And you'd be willing to walk away from being an author or authorpreneur if something better came along. So I hope that has been helpful to you in figuring out which path you're really on in this whole self-publishing game. And if you found it helpful, please rate, review, and subscribe to The Heidi Thorne Show on whatever podcast platform you like to use. I'm on all the major ones: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Amazon TuneIn Radio, and Podbean. If you like the YouTube video better, just subscribe to my Heidi Thorne YouTube channel and turn on the notification bell so that you get an alert when a new video is available. I would appreciate it if you would share this show on social media with your friends. And if you'd like to see my self-published books, they are on Amazon, Audible, and Apple Books. All you have to do is type in my name, Heidi Thorne, go to my author page, and all my books are listed there. If you'd like to connect with me, my website is very simply HeidiThorne.com. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. I'll look forward to talking with you again in the next episode, and in the meantime, have a great day.